Speaker, they're making a lot of noise now, but I've got a long list here of what his MPs really think of him. Yeah. Dragging everyone down. Who said that? Come on. Who was it said that? Authority is destroyed. Come on, hands up. Which of you was it? Which of you? Come on. Can't win back trust. Anybody owning up? You're very quiet now. Hands. Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer faced humiliation in Parliament when his statement on attacks on private schools provoked a strong reaction. He was directly accused of lying, a rare and scandalous moment in British politics. When Starmer confidently stated that the tax would not lead to school closures, an outraged voice was heard from the chamber saying, "That's a lie." The Speaker was forced to intervene, but the MPs could hold back no longer. At that point, Starmer didn't just lose control of the debate, he faced the destruction of his reputation. His attempts to portray tax reform as a step toward fairness looked like a pathetic attempt to hide the consequences that had already shaken the nation's educational system. When the buzz in the hall subsided, the feeling was unequivocal. The Prime Minister had just made a serious mistake that could cost him the public's trust.
My personal favourite is this. This is a document circulated by his backbench, in which they call him the Conservative Corbyn. Prime Minister, I don't think that was intended as a compliment. Week after week, he stands there and spouts the same nonsense. The economy's booming. Everything's going swimmingly. The people should be grateful. But whilst he's telling Britain that we never had it so good, millions of working people and businesses know the reality. Britain's growth is going to be slower than our competitors and our inflation higher.
Keir Starmer's policy of imposing VAT on private schools has led to a mass closure of educational institutions. Already 12 schools have ceased to operate, and 77 independent schools have closed since the tax was first discussed. Thousands of families who opted for private education are now forced to seek places in overcrowded public schools with deteriorating conditions. Contrary to Starmer's promises, tax reform has only increased inequality. Elite schools like Eton will survive the changes, while small regional schools are on the brink of survival. Closures are leading to job losses for teachers, increased competition for state school seats, and a decline in the quality of education. Despite the obvious problems, Starmer continues to insist that reform is the right thing to do, ignoring the devastating effects that Britain will feel for years to come.
Control of our fisheries, of our borders, and of our independent lawmaking abilities. And if he does any of this, he will be completely betraying his promises in the 2024 election, and he will be taking this country in completely the wrong economic direction. So if you care at all about democracy or the economic salvation of Britain, then I urge you to fight again for the freedoms that people voted for in 2016 and which Keir Starmer is now threatening to throw away. Read my column in the Daily Mail.
The introduction of VAT on private schools was a real blow to the entire UK education system. Starmer assured that the tax would bring £1.8 billion to improve state schools, but in practice the reform has only exacerbated the crisis. The closure of private schools is forcing thousands of pupils into already overstretched state schools, where there are not enough places, teachers and resources. Classes are getting larger, teacher workloads are increasing, and the quality of education is falling. Parents who have been saving for years for their children's education are now forced to compete for places in the best state schools, which only increases inequality. Policies claimed to help the working class have actually hit the working class, creating chaos instead of reform. Starmer promised improvements, but instead plunged the education system into a deep crisis, the effects of which Britain will feel for years to come.
If it's the right thing for the country in the long term.
No crisis going to waste, as Keir Starmer pinned blame for the summer riots on the Tories too.
They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society, infected by a spiral of populism which fed off cycles of failure of the last government.
A dire prognosis to brace the country for a budget in 8 weeks with tax rises and spending cuts that did not appear in his manifesto.
There is a budget coming in October.
Keir Starmer presents his tax reform as a step towards social justice, but his own biography exposes this lie. He went to a state grammar school, which later became a private one, but now does everything he can to ensure that other children do not have the same chance. Starmer speaks of equality but has himself taken advantage of opportunities that he now destroys. Parents who sacrifice a lot to educate their children face school closures and rising prices, while the Prime Minister continues to assure us that his tax will help public schools. In reality, however, large elite institutions like Eton will be unaffected, and the middle class will be forced out of private education, which will only widen the gap between rich and ordinary families. Starmer, having climbed the social ladder, is now tearing it down, leaving no chance for others to repeat his path.
The Tories deny there is a black hole at all.
Obviously, halfway through any financial year, there'll be overspends in some areas, underspends in others. There'll be tax receipts that might be above expectations or not. That's not quite the same as going around desperately trying to find an excuse to have to tax working people in the October budget.
200 miles north in West Yorkshire, how different is the political climate? This constituency voted Labour for the first time in nearly 2 decades. But are they understanding of the need for difficult choices?
I don't think it's his fault that things are going to get worse. But I think hopefully he's going to sort of level the playing field a bit.
They also they've inherited a mess, but then they don't seem to do the right things to try and put it right.
It's going to hit the lower class more than the upper class. It's going to be the grassroots people who get it the hardest.
A new Prime Minister promising these voters so much, but with so little to do it with, now at the peak of his power.
Thank you so much for coming. Lovely to see you again.
Will they be thanking him the next time they go to the polls? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Keir Starmer's policies are not just denying families a choice, they are jeopardizing the education system itself. The imposition of VAT on private schools has led to the dismissal of hundreds of teachers, because the closing schools can no longer support them. These teachers could help improve public schools, but instead find themselves out of work and overcrowded classrooms in public schools. Instead of the promised improvements, the system is bursting at the seams with more students and fewer teachers. Parents who have saved for years for private education are forced to send their children to public schools with insufficient space and resources, reducing the quality of education. The irony of the situation is that the elite schools where the children of politicians go will not suffer, but the middle class is being held hostage to a failed reform. Starmer is creating a crisis that Britain will be sorting out for years to come. Keir Starmer faces a political crisis that threatens to destroy his reputation. The introduction of VAT on private schools has not just sparked parental outrage, it has caused judicial and parliamentary resistance. The Independent Council of Private Schools has filed a lawsuit claiming that the new tax violates the rights of children and parents, and discontent is growing among Labour itself. Even fellow party members admit that the reform is too harsh and needs to be reconsidered. If the court rules against the government, Starmer will have to rescind the tax in disgrace, admitting the failure of his policy. But if he stands his ground, he risks triggering the biggest education crisis in modern British history. His attempts to assure us that everything is under control look increasingly ridiculous. Every new day of his reign makes it clear this tax reform could be his biggest political mistake. What do you think about it? Write your opinion in the comments.